Hello, my name is Jacob. I go by Robotic Device Online. This is going to be the story about my 1986 Caprice Classic. It's been a little over a year since I lost the car, and there was a big situation surrounding it. I made some threads on Reddit with legal advice to kind of figure out what I'm going to do about the situation. And since it's been long enough, I think now is about a good time to tell the story about it. Not least of which because as time goes on, I want to remember the good times about the car, and I also want to remember what happens. It's just a good time to do things. So, starting with the car itself, it was a 1986 Caprice Classic Brougham with the 4.3-liter 262 V6 and a 3-speed Hydra-matic. It was a blue top, white body, blue interior. It was absolutely covered in rust and dents, but I did not care at all. I used to say that it was big, old, and ugly, just like my grandpa, and I loved the both of them, so that was fine with me. The interior was in a lot better shape than the outside, but it was just bit sun faded. There was some plastic cracking. The dashboard wasn't great, but there was a carpet on top, so it was fine. So starting with how the car came into the world, it was originally bought by a little old lady who just wanted to go to church and back on Sundays. She had it for about a decade and a half, passed away, and her daughter didn't really want to deal with it. At this point, it was already pretty not good looking, rusty, dented from just sitting around all the time and not really doing anything, so she sold it to a mechanic. He was going to restore it, but after a year he kind of gave up on that and didn't want to do it. My great-grandpa came along and said he wanted a car, so they made a deal. $100 a month for a year, and the car is his. And they did this because my great-grandpa couldn't afford any more than that, but he could get $100 a month, so that's what they did. He used the car just to go to church and back on Sundays, just the same as that little old lady. And in 2008, 2009 or so, he couldn't drive anymore. He had already lost one of his legs. He was falling over trying to get in. So my grandpa started driving him to church and back on Sundays instead, and the car more or less just became his at that point. My great-grandpa ended up passing away in 2011, and at that point it was my grandpa's. At first I didn't really like the car. I liked being in it. I liked when my grandpa drove it because it was comfy, it was different. It's not really like the cars that my mom and grandma were driving. So it was different, but it really wasn't the car for me. I wasn't into cars yet. It was ugly, that sort of thing. Eventually, my grandpa couldn't drive anymore, and it was at this point that they moved, and it was getting parked on the street. And the funny thing about that is when they did that, my grandpa believed in always leaving the doors unlocked because if a thief wants in, they're just going to break the window, so at least you don't have to spend the money on a window. And of course, the very first day that they parked it there, that they lived in that house that they bought, a thief comes by jiggling door handles and pops the hood and tries to steal the battery, but got caught in the process. Since my grandpa couldn't drive anymore, at that point I locked all the doors and just told him that they were unlocked. Now by this point I'd already gotten my license and I'd been driving for a little while in a 2007 Pontiac, and my grandpa couldn't really walk anymore, so couldn't get out to the car to turn it over, drive it around, so that more or less became my chore. And my best friend Hunter came over all the time, so it was just one of the things that we did. We'd turn the car over, drive it around the street, have some fun, that sort of thing, park it. And my grandpa told us we're his two grandsons, because Hunter and I grew up together. I've known him since I want to say 6 and he was 4. So he said when he dies, it's our car, jointly, both of ours. Now at that point in time, I was actually living with my grandparents, and I ended up moving back in with my mom, just not too far away. So the Caprice had to be moved over to a mechanic that he liked. That mechanic actually happened to be a priest, which is a little bit of a weird profession for a priest, but I guess I don't know what profession priests normally have outside of being a priest. So that's where it was. And I bought a 2005 Mazda RX-8 in 2014, right about that same time. I spent one winter with it, and it was a terrible experience. That car cannot handle snow at all. It bottoms out on it all the time. I had all-season tires, and it just slipped and slid everywhere. I was still kind of getting used to driving stick, so even like a slight incline that was a little bit slippery was ridiculously difficult for me. And after that one winter, I just said, I can't do this. I need to get something else. So it was about at the start of summer 2015 I knew that I needed to get another car or something that I could drive during winter because the RX-8 just wasn't going to cut it. And the Caprice was pretty well perfect for that. I mean, it's got no power at all, it's automatic, it's super duper heavy. It was basically perfect for snow. So that's what I wanted to use. So I went and got it from the mechanic, and when I did, my grandpa actually surprised me by buying some 14-inch Krager rims that were, I think, late 70s, early 80s, but they looked really nice, just rusty. They put it on the car, I drove it home, got a car wash on the way home, which is a joke in and of itself just because the car was horrendously ugly from all the rust and asphalt that was on the hood from when my great-grandpa decided that he wasn't going to move it for when they repaved the parking lot at his nursing home. I got it washed, got home, and that's when I started driving it more or less regularly, and I learned to love it. It was a completely different driving experience to the RX-8 or really anything else that I was driving, and now that I was actually driving it out on the highway, it was just really different to me. Uh, I'd be playing Cherry Pie on the radio with an arm out the window or maybe an arm over the bench and just feeling like I've been transported back to the 80s. It was great. I really enjoyed it. Of course, winter came along and it was great. It was super duper easy to drive. You couldn't slide the thing no matter how hard you tried. Went up and down hills no problem. Of course, it's an automatic, so I don't have to really feather the clutch or more accurately smell my clutch at all times because of how much it's getting burnt trying to go up a slight incline. But I just loved it. It was perfect for what I wanted it for, and even after that winter, I just wanted to keep driving it. So I started driving it interchangeably with my RX-8. 50% of the time I drove this, 50% of the time I drove that. And the thing about the Chevy is that everyone always knew when I was at work, school, or really anywhere. I'd be driving out on the road and I'd get a text. I'd check my phone whenever I got where I was going and see, I just saw you driving here. How'd you know it was me? Of course you knew it was you. You're driving the big ugly Chevy. Yep, that's me. And that's always fun. So the first winter I had it, I was just going to school and back. I wasn't actually working yet, so I didn't drive it all too much. But the next winter I was working. I was doing overnights in a gym. It would often snow overnight. It wouldn't get plowed by morning, so it wouldn't always be too easy to get home. So I prepared by putting a sleeping bag, some food out in the car, just in case I ended up having to sleep in it, and of course I did. One night there was like 7 inches of snow or something. It didn't get plowed, and traffic was horrible, so it was either going to be, I don't know, 2 hours to get home, and I decided I was just going to sleep in the car, and it was great. I just slept over the bench seat with my sleeping bag, ate some protein bars I kept in the back, and was fine. Then I just got up and went into work early and got some overtime. Next morning, all the roads were plowed, so just drove home, and it was fine. It was great. The car did a great job. And it was while I was working that same overnight job in early 2017 that my grandpa passed away. And it's a little funny. When my great-grandpa passed, he passed along the Caprice and his dog to my grandpa. When my grandpa passed, he passed along the Caprice and that same dog to me. So I was joking with Hunter that, since it's considered both of our cars, the car is going to be going into my name. If I die, he gets the Caprice and he has to take the dog too. It's tradition. He has to take both of them. That's just the way it is. And it was maybe a year later in early 2018 that I started up the subreddit Caprice Classic. I just wanted a way to remember my grandpa, kind of tell stories about what was happening with it, maybe find some help if anybody else has the same car, or help somebody else if they have the same car so I can help them with things I've done in the past. Share knowledge about them, put commercials and things up, share the story about the car as far as I could remember, that sort of thing. One of the things I specifically remember is when I got my custom plates for the car, they read A.W. King for my grandpa's name, Alfred Wayne King. That's one of the things I put on the subreddit. Way of remembering my grandpa, very fitting for the car. So after that, chronologically, things kind of blur together. I don't remember what order everything happened in, so kind of just going to tell stories in the way that I remember them. The nice thing about having a pretty ugly car is you don't really have to care about what it looks like. So Hunter and I would pretty often go out and get snow cones from a local place, and we'd either lean against the car or sit on the bumper, eat our snow cones, or sometimes we'd get on the hood or the trunk, and since they're pretty flat and like 6-8 feet long, you could just lay on there and look up at the clouds or the stars and just enjoy the outdoors. It was pretty great. Like I said, it wasn't pretty enough to care about making it any uglier, so it was fine. Nothing to worry about. My stepdad worked at a convent, and it was more or less abandoned. Nobody lived there, so he lived there just to watch over it, make sure nobody broke in, fix anything that goes wrong. And my mom lived there with him. One time I went to go visit. I got there very early, and I just needed to move around. I got into kind of a weird spot, so I was just going to drive through the grass. That's what they do all the time. So I started backing over the grass, and as it turns out, there was a big pile of leaves covering up a gigantic hole. So I backed straight into it and bottomed out my Caprice. So the left wheel was all the way up in the wheel well. The right wheel was just dangling out in nowhere, and since it was an air ride, there was just no pressure to give any give on the left side, so no way of getting it out. I had to wait until they got home a little while later. They towed me out of that hole, and as it turns out, it was fine. There was no damage to basically anything, or at least no damage that mattered. But the air ride was kind of iffy after that. It started to have trouble with pressure, but it just slowly leaked out. I just filled it up every once in a while, and it was fine. As long as you didn't weigh down the back end or anything, you didn't even need to do that. It just kind of maintained, I guess, 50 psi or something like that, somewhere in that range. The fun thing about that is it leads into the next story. So one time I was at Hunter's place, and his dad came in asking if anybody can take these girls to the prom with their dates. And I had the only car that could seat 6. I was okay with helping out, so I say, sure, why not? 2 of the girls get in, one of the guys gets in the front. I drive over to pick up one guy and one more girl. After I've got everybody, because of the pressure in the back kind of not being so great, on pretty much every bump, it started to rub against the wheels because I had 3 girls in the back. Of course, I'm not the one going on the date here, so we got up to a stoplight, and I just leaned back and said, "Girls, if you could collectively lose a little weight, I would greatly appreciate it. We're rubbing on all these bumps here." Absolutely hilarious. All the guys in the front are laughing like crazy. The girls in the back act offended for all of about 10 seconds, and then just start laughing because it's pretty funny. I'm like, I'm tired of it. We gotta go and fill up the back end, something like that. So we stop rubbing. But that was pretty fun. I ended up getting them to the prom, filled up the back end a little. And I never ended up fixing that pressure issue, but it was fine for the rest of the time I had it, so didn't really matter. And another thing I did pretty often was I would drive my dogs around at night. So I had 3 dogs at the time. I had my little Shih Tzu RD that I inherited from my grandpa. I had a Husky Shepherd Lab mix named Megan, and I had a Border Collie named Wizard. They were all kind of older at this point, all over 10. I'd load them in the front seat, roll the windows down, get some nice cool night air, let them stick their noses out. Just enjoy the time. And they always liked it. They always liked being in the car because it was nice and comfy for them. And of course I like driving around just because I like driving the car and I like being with my dogs. Now, Hunter and I would try to do work on it ourselves whenever something went wrong, and for the most part, everything was so simple, it was so easy to get to things, big, old, lots of wasted space in the engine bay, and everything was so cheap that if we did break it, it wasn't that expensive to just replace whatever we broke. One of the very first things that we replaced were the side mirrors, where we found out that on the passenger side, there's not even a little hole for the adjuster because the little old lady who bought the car didn't get the $23 option to be able to adjust the passenger side mirror. So we cut off the adjuster and just taped it in place, and that's how it was for years after that. We were also going to replace the rear view mirror because I got a deal when I got those 2 side mirrors where I got the center mirror basically for free. We ripped off the old center mirror and really did not realize just how hard it is to put one of those things up there. Didn't know that it just slides onto a little nub, so that's our mistake. We tried to put that little mirror up at least a dozen times, and it never stayed up for very long at all. One time I needed to pass safety, and they failed me because I didn't have the center mirror. They said if I show up with it on, they'll just pass me. So I, right afterwards, went and bought another one of those little kits, put the little nub up there, waited a few days, came back, and in the parking lot, I put the mirror up and pulled in. And they didn't tell me I had to do anything. They just said I had to be there. They told me I had to flick it, and I do. And just flick it hard. I said, "Guy, come on. You're killing me here." Flick it again, it stays on. They pass me, and as I'm coming off the little ramps to go out, it just falls off again. And I just get a little grin, and I just drive on out, and went and registered my car. And that was great. I ended up getting that fixed by finding a kind of sketchy place after calling around. He said $20 for good epoxy, and I said that is not overpriced at all. I've tried like 12 different kits. I've definitely spent more than $20. If you put this thing up there and it stays up there, I'm happy. He said it's gonna stay up there. So I talked to the guy. We get out. We're gonna go to the car, and I kind of parked on the street next to the building. Come to find out, that is the first time I ever locked myself out of the car. He went out there. He had the kit to get in. Ended up getting in, gave me my key, probably thought that I was a complete and total idiot, which admittedly I am, just maybe not in that way. But I'm sure he felt bad for me when he saw my car. He gave me a discount of like $5 or $10 as a result, which is something I saw pretty often. Anytime I drove that car and people saw me drive that car, I seemed to just get discounts for no reason. Guess pity is great sometimes. And of course, it wasn't until a little while later that I ended up finding out that you don't even need the key to get in the car. You just gotta bang on the right spot on the door and it just unlocks and you're good. You also didn't need the key to turn it on, just have to know the right way to wiggle it and it'll just turn on. And you didn't even need the key to keep it running, just take the key out and you're done. And that's something I did pretty often. If I had somebody new in the car, I'd be driving it, I'd just take the key out and say, "Here, hold this for me." Just keep on driving, and it always took them about 5 seconds to look at the key, look at the ignition, look at the key, look at me. Wait, what? It was always pretty funny. And another fun thing I do if I had somebody else in the car is I'd get to a gas station, hand them my key, hand them my card, and say, "Here, fill up for me, I'll go in and get us some snacks." Go in, get the snacks, come out, watch them walk all around the car trying to figure out where on earth the fuel filler is, and I just go and flip down the license plate, and they just give me that look of disapproval. But it was always hilarious, and they'd laugh just a couple seconds later. It's just a weird place for it. Nobody really expects it to be back there because no modern car is going to do that again, at least not that I can imagine. Another thing I dealt with the car for a long time was a loose negative battery lead. For whatever reason, it just constantly stripped. I replaced the battery, and it would be stripped. I replaced the little nut to screw into the battery, and it would be stripped. And it wasn't until eventually I replaced both at the same time that it was finally fixed. But what led to that point was when I got stranded one time. I was on my way to work, it was in the middle of winter, it was snowing, and the negative battery lead just fell off, so as I was coming up to a stoplight, the car just died out of nowhere, no electrics, nothing. A trucker saw me, he came, he pushed me to the side of the road. I couldn't get the hood open because it was frozen shut, so I had to get a tow of 1 mile back home, drove a different car to work that night, and then when I got back in the morning, sunlight just melted whatever it was that was freezing it in place, opened it up, and that was the end of that. Put it back on, it was working fine again. Speaking of replacing the battery, I ended up replacing the battery quite a few times. When I first bought the first battery, they offered me a 5-year warranty, and I said, there is no way I'm going to lose on this deal. You guys are going to lose on this deal if you offer it to me. They said I could have it, I took it, and I think I replaced the battery 5 or 6 times in the time that I had the car, and just got it for free every time. 100% worth it. I think it was around that same time that I had a vacuum tube break when I replaced the air filter, and I went to buy another one. It was like $10 for a little tube, so I just got some electrical tape, taped it back up, and it was fine. Never noticed a problem, don't even think it mattered. Probably one of the biggest things that broke with the car was when the driver's side exterior door handle stopped working, so I had to crawl across the passenger side, and I've taken the door panel off quite a few times by this point, so I was very familiar with it. I took the door panel off, I looked inside and I saw that the little linkage coming from the door handle was just not in the socket. So I put it back in the socket, and it looked like if you were trying to open with the exterior door handle with the interior door handle at the same time, it would just pop out every time. And I thought to myself, I bet I can bend this so that never happens again. And I was right, because I sheared it in two, so it was completely totally broken, and it never happened again, because it was completely totally broken. And for the rest of the time I had that car, no matter where I went, the junkyards or online, I could not find a replacement linkage. So from there on out, I crawled across the passenger side to get in, but I could get out from the driver's side door. Really wish I could have fixed that one, or maybe didn't just shear that piece of metal in two, or maybe found a welder or something, but never did, so just one of those issues I dealt with. Another thing that was broken from the very start was the air conditioning. It never worked except for a grand total of 5 minutes at random twice. The first time was shortly after I got it. I was sitting in the parking lot at work. I turned it on because it was a little bit hot, and the only thing that happened was a ton of dust just blew out of the vents and straight at me. It was cold for all of about 2 minutes of me coughing through all this dust, and that was the end of it, and it just didn't work again. And then later on, I think like 3 years later, for whatever the reason, the air conditioning just worked for another 2.5 minutes. Never again. I have no idea why it worked for 2.5 minutes twice, but it did it twice. Really no clue. It's one of those things that happens with the car that I just can't explain. Speaking of those things that I just can't explain, at one point I thought I blew a head gasket because it was just billowing smoke out the back. Constant, gigantic white puffs of smoke. I thought for sure I blew a head gasket, so I had to park the car for about a month or two. I finally had enough money I could fix it. I drove it all of about a mile to get it to the place to get it fixed, and I turned it off, went inside, came outside. Guy says, okay, show me what it's doing. Turn the car on, nothing. Nothing at all. No smoke, no nothing. And I gave it some gas. I promise you, I was billowing smoke. I pointed down the street and said, "See this gigantic cloud of smoke that all these people are driving through? That was me. That was me right there." Never did it again. Never had another issue with it. Didn't do anything about it at all. And somehow, what I assume was a head gasket fixed itself. Things just magically fixed itself on that car sometimes, and I have no idea why. Not going to complain, but I still have no idea why. And speaking about the AC, another thing that went bad was the window motors. Only 2 of them worked, and they were really, really slow. It was about $100 to get all new window motors and put them in, or it was about $300, maybe $400 to fix the air conditioning. Me being me being poor, thinking, okay, I can fix this. I will fix the windows, and as long as I'm driving, I got some wind, I'll be perfectly fine. Save $300, that'll be great. And as it turns out, I am completely, totally wrong about that, because most of the time I was in stop-and-go traffic, and windows don't work if you don't have wind. And even when you do have wind, hot wind is still hot. So, bad decision on my part, another thing I never fixed. Later down the line, I started to get sick of the sound system not working. My grandpa put in a new head unit, but it was some crappy head unit that wasn't installed right. It was loose in its socket, and for whatever reason, if you got it above, I think the volume was like 15, it would stop playing and make the weirdest, faintest, I swear it sounded exactly like a cat, meowing sound. No idea why, you just have to turn down the volume and it's fine. It turns out the reason that happened was it obviously wasn't wired correctly, it wasn't getting enough power, and rather than just turn the thing off and back on, it just did whatever you want to say that was. Now, when I went to upgrade the sound system, I could have kept the original head unit, but I didn't like it because it was all blue LEDs, it didn't match the car, I wanted something that looked like it belonged in the car. And what I ended up finding was a Rockford Fosgate marine head unit. So it was waterproof and made for boats, which I thought was really fitting because I used to say that my car was my land yacht, so I got a head unit for a boat for my boat of a car. For the speakers, I also got Rockford Fosgates, and then for the subs, I got two 15-inch 2500 watt Boss subwoofers and a 5000 watt Boss amplifier that I basically got for free. I ordered them from Amazon, ended up not being able to afford to pay someone to install them, didn't have the time to do it myself just yet, so I said I wanted to return it. They said it's a warehouse deal. We don't want them back because we don't want to sell them anymore, so they just said, here's your money back, keep them, do whatever you want with them, which I was more than happy to oblige. I went to my friend Eric's house, and I could not have done it without him. He knew basically everything about the process, and I knew basically nothing about it, and we did the whole sound system ourselves. So we put in the little front speakers, which was a huge pain because we had a lack of tools, and it was really hard to get a wrench in. It was right up against the glass in front. But we got them out, got them in, and then the rear, there's like this mounting mechanism for the rear deck. But the speakers that I bought, while they were the right size, I think they were 4x6 or 6x8 or something, they were too tall. So they didn't fit in the little mounting mechanism underneath, and we ended up just screwing them right into the deck. You couldn't see the screws from the top where the carpet was, so who cares? And it was fine. In a lot of ways, I think that sound system sounded better than the RX-8, even if the speakers weren't as nice or expensive or anything, just because we put it in ourselves, and that's extremely satisfying. For the most part, I kept the subs really low. I didn't want to bother anyone. I just liked the rumble that they made, and since they're so gigantic, it took almost no power to do it. The day that we installed them, I was driving around on the highway with the volume cranked so I could listen to it and kind of get the most out of it. I didn't want to bother anybody. And I got up to a stoplight getting off the highway, and a guy in a lifted truck pulls up next to me, blasting his music. It's some sort of rap. It sounds terribly distorted and just bad overall, and I figure if there's no better time to do it, it's now. Turned up the volume all the way, turned up the bass all the way, and just blasted Cherry Pie. And it was glorious. He was not very happy, but it was absolutely hilarious for me. Another issue I ran into pretty often was with the tires. Because of those Krager rims, they're only 14-inch rims, but the rears were supposed to be 285 in width, and the fronts were supposed to be 245 in width. And that's basically impossible to find. Can't do it. Good luck. So I was either buying used tires, which were all 205 front, maybe 235 in the rear if you're lucky. And what I ended up doing was just buying a full set of tires off eBay. And you know you're getting a quality tire if you buy it off eBay for $30. Full set of tires, $120 shipped, put them on the car, which more or less just equated to blowing 5 tires in 6 months. And amazingly, none of them ever blew out on the road. It was just sitting in the driveway. I remember parking it, didn't drive it for 2 days. I went out, looked at it, tires perfectly fine, or at least I didn't notice anything wrong. Go out the next day, flat, ruined, nothing you can do about it. So I learned to change a tire really quick on that car. I had to take all of them off and put them back on quite a few times. I painted the rims gold because they got so terribly rusty and ugly as a result, and rechroming a wheel is $250 a wheel. I just can't afford that. So got some gold spray paint, spent an afternoon just spraying them down. I think it turned out looking great. Other people might not share that opinion. I know my mom certainly did not, but I think it turned out great. I think it looked really good on the car. The paint just didn't hold up very well with time, but oh well, it's another thing I did myself and I did it cheap. Another repair I did myself was a headlight, and the headlights are really, really easy to get out. It's just 2 little retention springs held on by a bolt. You take both the bolts out, you take the headlight out, and you have to get it out of its bracket. But getting it out of that bracket is really hard. For whatever reason, it just rusted in place. Really hard to get it out. Eventually I did, put the new one on, spent another maybe 5-10 minutes fumbling with the little retention springs to get them in place so I could screw it back in, and I was done. And what this leads into is when I was going to get safety tested, different time from the one before, and I failed. He said I could pass, they can do it for me, if I just get a replacement headlight. And I told him, you could just pass me, and we won't have to do any of this. He said, you got to get that headlight replaced, we'll do it for you, 25 bucks. I said, 25 bucks to replace that headlight? It took me like an hour or something last time, go for it. He spends maybe 30 minutes or so trying to get that headlight out of its little bracket. Eventually, he's just getting more and more frustrated. He looks at it, looks at me, looks at it, looks at me. Screw it, you passed, and he just put the broken one back in. I was like, cool, told you could have just done that from the start. And passed and went on my way. So going back to things chronologically, I needed to move out of my mom's place. She was going to sell the house. She was going to move in with her boyfriend. I needed someplace to go. I found a local apartment, and I went to every showing, paper signing, discussion, anything in the Chevy. And when I went and signed the lease, paid over the deposit, they gave me the stack of paper with all the rules and things. And on the very front of it, because of course, me being me, I want to read through them all, is one that says that cars with a certain amount of rust and a certain amount of space are not allowed. And I brought it up and said, well, what about my car? And said, oh yeah, you can't have that. But I drove it here every single time. Why didn't anybody tell me before? I said, well, what do I do about this? Can I get a cover? Nope, can't have any covers. Why? They just wouldn't give me a good reason, said car covers aren't allowed. They said that my deposit is non-refundable, so I can find somewhere else to live, and I couldn't do that. I needed to move. It was only like 2 weeks before I had to move, so I just kind of had to deal with it. And what I ended up doing was leaving the car parked at my mom's until she sold it, or tried selling it, because a big ugly car sitting outside does not really raise the value of the property very much. And then I moved it over to her boyfriend's place. It was parked there for a while until they had to move, and then it went to another family member's. And for that entire year I was in that apartment, I just wanted my Chevy back. I asked several times if I could have it back for a day so that I could get it appraised for a paint job or anything like that so I could, have it where I live. And I asked them, I think, 4 times, and they denied me once because it was next to a holiday, and they said, well, people might see it. Well, what problem with that is mine? I don't care if people see it. And they just didn't like that. So I was not a fan of that place, and I got out after my 1-year lease. And while I was still living at that place, every month or so I'd at least go and see the car, turn it on, drive it around. And funnily enough, there was a rat's nest of wires under the hood one night. And that is a literal term. It was a rat's nest because a rat had gotten into it and made a nest out of some of the headliner and some of the wires and was just living in there. He got chewed out, and I cautiously got in the car and I just went around the neighborhood and rocked the boat back and forth kind of as hard as I could so that whatever rats might still be in it will just fall out. Looked absolutely ridiculous, but it was at least funny for me. And amazingly, even though whatever wires he chewed through or moved around were obviously messed with, the car was fine. I didn't notice anything wrong with it. Nothing stopped working, so wasn't that big a deal. But I was glad that I was going to move it away from there not too long after that. Now, not too long before I moved out of that place is when my RX-8's engine blew, and I've already got a 35-minute video about that, so we're not gonna go into that. I borrowed my mom's car for a little while since I still had to live there, and I had to move things back and forth to get to my new place. But I finally got there, and as quick as I possibly could, I went and got the Chevy back. And of course, people were concerned, oh, it's been parked for so long, it doesn't really move, is it going to be able to make the hour and a half drive back? And sure enough, me being confident, made the whole thing, no problems whatsoever, it was perfectly fine, got it home, and that was pretty much the only car I drove for the most part for a long time. I still had my mom's car, just in case she didn't want me to give it back in case something happened with the Chevy, but I had it if I needed it, and I didn't. The car just kept on running. It just kept on having no problems at all, and I drove it basically every day. So this is where things stopped to be quite so fun and interesting story-wise. So my friend Hunter, he went on a mission for 2 years, and he had just gotten back into town. He needed a place to stay for a week, needed a car to drive for a week, and I had 2 cars. I had the Chevy, I had my mom's car, and me being my friend, and it being half of his car said, come and stay with me, come and drive my car, I don't mind at all. And he was having fun with it too. He was driving it back and forth where he needed, and the last night that he was supposed to have it, it was raining kind of hard. I sent him a text, and I told him I live in a flash flood area. It does get pretty wet, but it hasn't gotten too bad yet. And apparently he missed that text, or it just didn't come through something, because about 11 o'clock at night, really dark, really bad storm, he drives it into 6 inches of standing water. And of course it stalls out, it doesn't move. He has another friend following him who is also going to stay at my place for the night. They get out and they push the car over to somebody's driveway, and then they come over to me to tell me about it. And about 11:30 at night, I'm already in bed trying to go to sleep, get ready for the morning. My bedroom door opens, the light comes on, he comes over, he sits on the bed next to me, and he says, buddy, I didn't know you lived in a flash flood area. And he starts going into the story about the car and how it was really hard to see and drove through the water. They pushed it into a neighbor's driveway. And then he says that the neighbors were extremely nice. It's a nice little lesbian couple. They were making cookies. They were just really great. We didn't bring any cookies for you, of course. And I don't know why this is relevant to the story, but this is how he told it to me. And he says, but anyway, your car drowned, and we'll deal with that in the morning. And of course, at this point, I'm pretty awake, just thinking, what do you mean my car drowned, and where are the cookies? So in the morning, Hunter has it towed over to a family friend mechanic's place, and that mechanic refused to work on it because he said it was a piece of crap that is not worth his time. And my answer to that is, we're paying you. Why does it matter what you're working on? It's worth your time if you're being paid, right? Evidently not. So Hunter, not living around here, just going on his 2-year mission, he doesn't know anybody or anywhere that we can go to where he can afford to get it fixed. He said he would handle it. So the best he could find was his grandpa's neighbor, some sort of diesel mechanic named David Steiger. He knows next to nothing about him other than he lives next to his grandpa, he does odd jobs for his grandpa, he's helped with stuff with his grandpa. So it wasn't there for very long, and it was pretty quickly becoming apparent that we shouldn't try to fix it. I was being encouraged to just junk the car. Hunter encouraged me, his grandpa encouraged me. I don't really know what Steiger was saying, if he could fix it or not, but more or less we were just being told, junk the car. So Hunter and I went over and we tried to pull everything that I wanted to keep out of it. I got the seats, got the clock, got my car cover, got my Krager rims, but we didn't really have a whole lot of time. It was getting dark, it was raining, he was going to be leaving the next day, so I had to leave behind the sound system and pretty much just accept anything else in there I have to give up on. He couldn't be there with me when it went to get taken away, so the next day I was going to go alone. So the reason I was being encouraged to give up on the car was because it, of course, drowned. It's going to have all sorts of electrical issues. The carpet's going to be ruined and needs to be ripped out. It could develop mold, all this sort of thing. It just wasn't realistic to fix it. I was being encouraged to just junk it. And as much as I hated to do it, we were going to do it. So I went the next day, and Steiger was there, and he talked me into paying him to fix it. And I wanted so bad for my car to be fixed, I was willing to do it because it was going to be cheap and it was going to be the only way I could do it. This is at a really rough time for me. My dog, Megan, just lost the ability to walk about a week before. She was just old. She was, I think, 14 at the time. I was carrying her around outside and cleaning up after her 4 times a day, waking up twice in the middle of the night to take her outside. But I was also poor and I needed to get out of the house I was in. There's a whole situation with that house, including mold in the attic and the maintenance company just being absolutely terrible. At one point, their hiring department called me thinking I was an applicant, and all I could say is, fix my roof. I'm not an applicant. If I get hired on, will you fix my roof? And they kept calling me about that afterwards, too. But because I was trying to buy my house, I needed to save up money. I was working 10 hours of overtime, the maximum I possibly could every week, and just doing everything in my power to be able to get out of there as quick as I can. And of course, not helping matters was my RX-8, which, blown engine. Somehow the original $3,000 to $5,000 estimate is now, I think, in the $7,500 or $8,000 range. It was pretty bad at this point. This was my only chance. I'm not going to be able to afford to go to a real shop. Steiger was the only way I was going to be able to get this done if I could get it done. So he gave me hope, and I went for it. Now, at first, there really weren't any red flags, or at least not any that I noticed. I mean, Hunter and I knew absolutely nothing about the guy. It was only his grandpa, and his grandpa said he used him for odd jobs and things. So I didn't notice anything wrong. I mean, he had 2 kind of crappy cars, but obviously I have a pretty crappy car, so I don't really consider that a detractor of any sort. He was just kind of an older mechanic willing to do something on the side. Thought nothing of it. Thought guy just wants to help out. I can afford to pay him little by little. He's willing to do it slowly. This is my only chance, so go for it. But the first red flag that I remember was I told him the very first thing he should do is rip out the carpet because it was absolutely soaked with water and it's going to mold like crazy if you don't. And it was a couple days later, Hunter was back in time to go to the church, and I was there with him and mentioned the carpet. I'm going to go after we're done here. We're going to go and see if that's done. And it wasn't. He did not take out the carpet, even though it was a couple days later. And because I mentioned it, I said, we were going to take the carpet out. He immediately went and got the knife, and we started cutting it out together. And again, red flag. I should have known better. I asked about it. I asked if he thinks his grandpa trusts him, and he says, well, he uses him for odd jobs and all that. And I thought, maybe he was just busy. I mean, he's a mechanic. He's got to have his own job, something like that. So I had that big mental decision of, do I keep trusting him or not? And again, I said, if I don't, the car's just out and I have to junk it again. So went ahead and went back to him and figured I'd keep paying him. And at first he didn't actually ask for all that much money. He asked for, I think, $140 for what he had done so far, and then $40 for what he was about to do. And I was fine with that. I got him as $180, gave it to him. And over time, he'd ask for small amounts of money, and it was never too much. It was like 40, $50 or something. It was never enough that I couldn't do it if I absolutely needed to. I'd just say, give me like 3 days or something to give me time. And he'd say what it was for, and I'd be like, okay, yeah, I do need that, and so on. One thing that I remember he said that it needed was that the ECU had been fried, and it was overheating or something. He had to get dry ice to put on it, and then it worked just fine right afterwards. And he needs to get it rebuilt from a local shop. And it took about 3 weeks for that to be, quote unquote, fixed from that local shop. And I just assumed it's the local shop or whatever. I mean, what else could it be? But clearly that wasn't the case with time. So another thing that he wanted to do was replace the wheel studs. I had him put my Kragers back on, which we took off when we thought we were going to junk the car, and he said a bunch of them broke in the process. So I think I paid him, I think it was $2 for each stud, and then $1 in labor for each stud. I think it was a grand total of like $100 or something. And I paid it thinking, I guess I need the wheel studs. I know it's a huge pain to replace them. He's not charging much to do it. Here you go. Another big red flag is that he didn't have a cell phone. I called the number that he gave me, and I got his house phone, and his mom would answer, and he'd say he's at work, or he's not home, or something like that. And kind of as a result, I went a long time at a time without seeing the car, because he just wouldn't be there, and I'd have to ask for him. And for the most part, he would answer the phone often enough that I wasn't too suspicious. Like, he's just not home, he doesn't have a cell phone, or whatever. So one of the last times I paid him was after a month of not seeing the car. I kind of wanted to go and see the car again because I hadn't seen it in a while. He told me it's still not running. He's still doing whatever work to it. I don't even remember. I probably gave him $600 up to this point, all said and done. And he said that he would drive over to get it from me if I didn't have time because he wanted it now. And I said, okay. So I actually just didn't want to pay him. But if he's going to drive over here, I guess I have to go to an ATM and get money out. And I did. Paid him. And it was 1 month later that I finally went to see the car. And the reason I went to see it is because I called again and again and again, and I couldn't get a hold of him. It had been a couple weeks, and I just couldn't get a hold of him for anything. So Hunter was back in town. His friend was back in town. We were all in the car for some reason. So since we were going to be passing by his place anyway, I said, let's drop by. I want to see what's going on with my car. I can't get a hold of him. And surprise, surprise, he was actually outside as we got to the car, despite not answering the phone basically ever. And we finally got to see the car in the condition that he left it in. And it was absolutely horrible. There was overturned gas canisters, coolant canisters. My dashboard, I know it was cracked before, was in multiple pieces in the back seat. I guess because he couldn't be careful enough to not destroy something, just putting it in the back. My spare tires were just in the back seat, just sitting there, covered in dirt and stuff, getting all over the velour. There were wet leaves absolutely everywhere. You look in the trunk, tons of wet leaves and like bags of wet leaves. It smelled horrible. And I noticed the windows were down. And he said he just got out of jail that day. And I said, wait, what do you mean you just got out of jail? He said he went to jail for 2 weeks because he had parking tickets that he didn't pay for. And I was obviously very furious at this point. And because the windows were down, I said, why weren't they rolled up? He said, I was just staring it out. The windows wouldn't go up. He left the windows down for 2 weeks despite all the rain and everything. And that's part of why the smell was so absolutely horrible. It was mold. It had to have been mold or something. Mildew, I don't know. It was horrible. Horrible, horrible condition. He ruined it. Another thing I noticed was that on my seats, I had some very unfortunate cigarette burns on my seats. He was so careless with my car that he couldn't even put his cigarettes out somewhere. He put them out on my velour seats, and I kept those seats. So my seats that I kept from my car have these lovely cigarette burns from the most careless possible person with someone else's property. So as it turns out, he had been using the car personally and just told me that it wasn't working. He'd just been driving around to do odd jobs for things because he didn't have a job. Turns out he wasn't a diesel mechanic anymore. He didn't have a job. He was just doing odd jobs for people like Hunter's grandpa next door. He did somewhere around 500 miles, and I know this because I took a picture of the odometer when I thought it was going to get junked, so I'd know how many miles were on it when it finally died, and I took one after, and it was about a 500-mile difference. He was hauling wet leaves and all sorts of things like lawnmowers in the back seat, and it was just terrible. So I basically gave up at this point. I knew there was no saving it because the whole point of this, the biggest concern I had all this time was mold, mildew, something as a result of it drowning. It wasn't even that it couldn't run. I can park the car somewhere for years and then eventually deal with whatever electrical issue it has. But I can't deal with mold. Mold is something I need to deal with right now, and it's going to be a health concern, and I just can't deal with that. So I needed to get my stuff off the car. I went back to get my Kragers off the car. I was going to get the license plate too, and I noticed that's not my license plate. He took my license plates and put them on his car, and then put his plates on mine. And I said this is unbelievably illegal, and he's basically pretending to be theft by conversion. And he said he didn't know it was wrong. He's nearly 50 years old. He didn't know it was wrong to steal someone else's license plates and put them on his car. Again, absolutely garbage human being here. Since I was there, I was on my own and I had time. I got my speakers down and I had to lay down in the filthy, wet, gross, moldy, whatever leaves in the trunk with rocks and other junk all over the place in the back. And as it turns out, one of those speakers was pierced, presumably by something that he threw back and just landed on it and went straight through it. So one of my two nice Rockford Fosgate speakers that my friend and I put in is ruined. So that was great. There was no carpeting back there anymore to protect it. Don't know why. That should have been back there, but it wasn't. So my biggest concern was him stealing my license plates, and I took pictures of the license plates before I moved them. I took my license plates back, took his license plates, and basically just threw them on the ground next to his car. Uh, but I took pictures of them on his car first, so I could prove that he had effectively stolen my car. And I was concerned because he said he went to jail for 2 weeks for parking violations or traffic tickets or whatever. I don't want to go to jail for something he did, and that's when I made my Reddit thread and legal advice asking, how do I find out if I have anything in my name? What can I do about this? I understand I'm not going to get any money out of him. I just want to make sure that I'm not in any legal trouble because that's going to put me in trouble with work and all sorts of other things. Even though he told me, he promised me that he wasn't in my car when he got those speeding or traffic or whatever tickets, why on earth would I believe anything this absolute garbage of a person would tell me? And so what they ended up telling me was to file a police report and have them at a police station check to see if I have any tickets on my plates or in my name. And I went to the first police station, which was local. They told me they don't deal with this and sent me to another police station, and they said, really dumb, and everybody on legal advice commented about it. They said that, well, you got your plates back, right? Yes. Well, because the theft is no longer occurring and you've already got your plates back, there's nothing we can do about it. We can't make a police report for a crime that is no longer occurring. Some sort of paraphrasing of that. It was really dumb, and I said, but I want to make one anyway, and they just wouldn't let me. So couldn't make a police report, but they did check and said that I have no tickets in my name in their county, no tickets on my plate in their county, and I shouldn't worry about it. So at least there was that. I'm not in any legal trouble as a result of this. So over the entire time he had it, I think it was about 4 months, I gave him about $800 or so. And even after all this, because of the position I was in, working all that overtime, I needed money. He said he wanted to buy it from me, and I considered selling it to him. I told him I wanted $600, so I'd at least get some of my money back, and he said he'd scrounge it up, and I knew he was just going to keep stalling to pay me. I told him he had 1 week, or I'm just towing the car away and getting it junked. And I genuinely did not want to give him the car. He did not deserve the car. He did not do anything to get that car. I didn't want to give him my grandpa's car, but I really needed that money. And I gave him that 1 week, and I stuck to it, and I said, you're not getting any more time, and I had it towed away. And when I had it towed away, I was agreed on for $160 from one of those phone numbers that you call. They'll come and get it. I pulled the seats out of my car, and I was just sitting on the back of it one last time, kind of looking up at the clouds. Got down, got back to putting things away, and the neighbor from across the street came by to ask me about it. He said that he thought I was helping him fix it, and I knew what he was doing, and that he was driving it all this time, and he apologized that he couldn't tell me sooner, or that I didn't know. He gave me his information. In fact, he actually messaged me on Reddit. I mentioned that legal advice thread I made because it got a little popular, and said if I want to sue, he'll help me. He also told me a bit about him. Found out that he'd been to jail several times, including, and I think it was the most recent one he said for the traffic tickets, when he stole some kid's bike out of their garage because they left the door open. I had no idea about this. I had no idea he'd been to jail or that he's more garbage of a human being than I thought he was at this point. I've learned that whenever I give my car to somebody, I should probably Google them first and see if they've got any mugshots. He's got, I think, 6 now. I just wanted to believe my car was being worked on and that soon enough I'd have it back, and all this happens. So the tow truck finally got there. He puts it up on his lift really, really fast, and the car fell, and it destroyed the rear suspension almost certainly, not that it really matters anymore. He drove it onto the street, tried to open the door. Steiger broke the interior door handle on the driver's side, so I got to watch that tow truck driver come with a catalytic converter, I think, bust out the window in the street. Really wish he had done that in his driveway so he'd have nice glass shards all over next to his tires, but middle of the street where it bothers other people is fine, I guess. It was a pretty sketchy tow truck driver. He said it was going to go straight to the shredder, and that really broke my heart. I was really hoping that somebody would take the engine, it only had 30,000 miles on it, or the transmission, or maybe do like I was doing with pick and pulls and just getting any little part I needed out of it that was still in good condition. But no, straight to the shredder. And the worst part about that, he tried to shortchange me. Said, here's $140. It's $160. No, it's $140. $160. Look, I don't want to get rid of my car, guy. At least give me all the money I'm supposed to get. And he gave me the 20 bucks. And that was pretty much that. I got to watch it right away and went back to my car and started driving home. Now, I was angry and I was sad, but the timing was good in a bad way. I felt horrible, but for a little over, I'd say 2 days before this happened, I was told that we're going to be putting down my dog. I've been carrying her around for 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months at this point, just so that she can go outside and cleaning up after her all the time, doing everything I possibly could to care for her and keep her happy, and it was finally time to put her down. And it's really hard to feel bad about an object when you're about to lose something a whole lot more important than it. So in a way, I guess that's good timing, just not in a good way. And funnily enough, Steiger ended up going to jail the day after it was towed for driving on a suspended license in an unregistered car with no insurance, and he's got a lovely mugshot I'll probably put up in the video here. Garbage human being, I already know he's out because I've visited his grandpa since then, and I know he's walking around, and yeah, garbage human being. So, one thing that people ask me all the time is why didn't I sue or do anything? And the thing about that is he's a nearly 50-year-old man with no job, living with his mom, no source of income apart from these odd jobs. What am I going to get? Especially in a car that really wasn't worth anything. My insurance didn't value it anything. I didn't have full coverage, so the money I paid to have it towed, of course, is all I'm going to get. I knew I wasn't going to get anything out of him, and if I did, it's basically coming out of his mom. And that's the same reason I didn't do any sort of revenge, apart from me just being a decent human being. Of course, I thought about it. What person doesn't think about revenge? But the only thing I could think about is any sort of revenge that I took against him. Anything I did at all would just be against his mom. If I pop all his tires, how's his mom going to get a ride somewhere now? Who's going to pay to fix it? It's going to be his mom from her Social Security or whatever it was. Smash windows on the house. Yeah, that's his mom's house. She's going to be the one paying for it. Flaming bag of poop on the doorstep. I mean, maybe his mom comes out and gets it. I don't know, because I don't know when he's home or not, and no sort of revenge would make me feel better about my car anyway. And like I said, I'm a decent human being. I don't want to get myself into trouble over some waste of human life like him, and I don't want him to do something to me either. He's obviously a bad person with bad intentions and nothing to lose. He knew where I lived, at least for another 2 months at that point. I didn't want any sort of vengeance back on me, and I have to keep saying this, as surprising as it is, I like to think I'm a decent person, and I wouldn't get revenge. I'm just also a normal person who thinks about it. So in the end, I did keep some things. I kept the front seats, and I kept the rear bench, but the bench is only because I had it from before that. The front seats, I had to spend 2 hours with my friend Cody mold treating and cleaning as best as we possibly could to make sure that they weren't going to mold over and they were going to be fine. And even across the next couple days, I kept on like cleaning them as best as I possibly could to make sure they wouldn't mold. I want to do everything I could to keep them. I also kept my plates, and what I'm planning to do with the seats is turn them into a couch. I've just been lazy for a year and haven't bought enough 2x4 to actually turn it into a couch, but sooner or later I will, and it'll be great for my little retro basement. As for the license plates, I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mount them on the wall or maybe mount them on the back of the seats whenever I make them into a couch. Just because that would be fitting, you know, put AW King on the back of them. I've also got my old plates from the RX-8, so if I put them up on the wall, it'll fit. Um, I did end up buying my house. I bought it and moved in February, and I finally had a good chance to save. I missed my car a ton. And because the RX-8 continued to have more and more problems that just weren't getting addressed, and I needed another car, I was tired of using my mom's car and paying for everything that went wrong with it, you know, a car I don't even like. At a little over 6 months after, on 7-Eleven of all days, I bought what's more or less what I would consider a replacement for the Caprice, a 1985 Buick Riviera. Now, I didn't want to get another Caprice, even though I own Caprice Classic, because in my eyes, no other Caprice is my Caprice, and if I just get another one, it doesn't make me feel better. So I wanted to try something different that gave me the same feeling and reminded me of it, but you know, a different experience, new to me. The Riviera is in way better condition, and most everything works on it with just a couple exceptions, little meaningless things. And when I bought it during my test drive, I actually told the seller, I feel like my grandpa's sitting next to me, and any second now, he's going to say, let's order a pizza and surprise grandma on the way home. And I'm not trying to get a discount, but that really was how the car made me feel, and that's why I went ahead and bought it. I did drive another car before that, an 87 Lincoln Town Car, and that didn't give me that feeling. And it also was in a lot worse condition. But that's what I ended up getting as a replacement, more or less. And that's pretty much the end of the story. I've been neglecting to mention the RX-8 for the most part, just because I already made a 35-minute video mid-last year about it. But just to kind of continue off of that, what ended up happening was the Mazda dealer refused to work on it. They called their tech line, they said it had too many modifications, we're not going to work on it. The only thing they did was they replaced a battery, and it was almost $200. But shop number 3 saw my video, felt bad, called me, and offered me part of the money back from labor, and I said, to be fair, call it 2/3. He gave me $1,900 back. So when the Mazda dealer didn't work out, I went back to him. He fixed the major misfire issue, but of course more happens. So ended up having an issue with the thermostat, which he did fix. No idea how that came up out of nowhere. It was a brand new thermostat. And the clutch. And I went to him 5 times for the clutch. Spent, I think, $800 with him. Replaced the pedal, the master cylinder, the slave cylinder, so I thought. And it still had trouble, and I just decided after $800 I can't afford to keep spending money on this. I'm just going to leave it be for right now, and I will deal with it later, and I just won't go back to him for it. I'll find somebody else who can do the clutch for me. And a couple weeks after that, he responded to my video with something of a threat saying, you should tell the people the truth about what's happened, or I will. And I said, okay, I will tell everyone the truth about what happened, and there's a probably 2-page long full update of everything that happened between that point in time and the end of the video in the comments there. And the funny thing about that is he decides to be very unprofessional and say that I don't take responsibility for my own problems and that my Chevy drowning was my fault, not my friend's. I shouldn't have loaned it to him. And my answer there is, well, it was half his car. My grandpa gave it to us. And also, what does that have to do with your business fixing my car? Horribly unprofessional. I want nothing to do with him again, but I also don't want to talk about this anymore. And you'll notice I still have not said his name, even though he used his real name on that comment. But what this does lead into is something really neat. So I originally, when I made that video, got an offer on Reddit from a guy named Juan in the Missouri area, has a little race team, has his own little businesses, super duper great guy, offered to fix the car pro bono. Said that he feels bad for me. Pity is always great. I'll always take pity. And wants to help me out. Says he's a lot like me. So he comes over and we become friends, and we've been fixing the car together. We've been fixing both the cars together. And because, unlike Hunter, he knows a whole lot more about cars, it's a learning experience for me because he knows what he's doing. A lot less fumbling around and Googling and trying to figure out what on earth goes where with the Chevy. And now we're just fixing both cars and having fun with it. So, good things do happen, definitely. But, still wish I had my Chevy. So one last thing to touch on is a question I get pretty often. That's how do I feel about Hunter after all of this? And the answer is exactly the same. I feel no different towards him. He's always been my best friend. He's still my best friend. It was an honest mistake that could have happened to anyone, and I don't blame him one bit for it. It was dark. It was storming really bad in an area he didn't know that he didn't know was a flash flood area. Things happen. It's unlucky. I do not blame him one bit for it. Even recently, I went and attended his wedding. Super fun time. Got to embarrass him not with this story, of course, during the reception. Best friend. Nothing's changed about that whatsoever. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you care about the 35-minute video about the RX-8, I'm sure it's in the recommended on the right, and I'll put a link in the description. Thanks for listening to my story. Bye.